Hey guys, we're back here on the bonus round on GameTrailers for an all-new episode from QuakeCon 2014. This is our last episode of this session, but we've got Adam Sessler, Andrew Reiner, and Pete Hines here. And now we're going to talk about the internet's favorite topic, what's up with Bethesda? We've got Pete here to answer all your questions.
Oh, me?
Exactly. Reiner knows it all. Every Game Informer cover story, it's a new Bethesda game. So Pete, you know, Bethesda's obviously highly cared about on the internet about what you guys are doing, what games you're making. You know, one of the interesting things about Bethesda is you do so many different things, I think, and it is somewhat unpredictable about where the company is going. Like you had Battle Cry that you announced just before E3, which is this free-to-play action game. How do you guys go about deciding the kind of games that you're going to make?
We spend time with the folks who are the creatives, the devs,
right,
and talk to them about the kinds of stuff they're interested in making, you know, what they want to do, where they want to go. We're obviously not afraid to do new IP. We've been doing a ton of it lately with the Within and Battle Cry. We're not afraid to take a franchise like Wolfenstein, where a little bit of the varnish had come off of it, but you know, those guys said that franchise made us want to make games, and if you're not doing anything with it, like, would you let us have it and try and kind of reboot it and do something? So it really comes from the devs. I mean, Bethesda was a developer first and a publisher second. That is our history of making games and then publishing them ourselves, and we've continued to evolve as a publisher, coming from a dev focus, whether it's, you know, in what I do, which is marketing and PR, and trying to talk about the games in the way that we think the devs would want to talk about it and show them to what it is we make in the first place.
And we know, you know, you have such a legacy of all these great franchises. We know, Adam, lots of people have requests for certain games they want a company to make, Bethesda to make, but I'm sure it's tough to sometimes decide which idea to bet on.
No, I mean, and just thankfully they did all those Terminator games, you know, back a long time ago, because you know,
the bowling game, the Star Trek game, it's all been done. Drag Race.
You know, I think what's probably the most significant about Bethesda, and I don't know if people consciously regard this as why they have affection for the company, but with Morrowind, and then obviously then with Oblivion and Elder Scrolls, those were games that for most other publishers, on paper, it would look too toxic. It's like, how long are you going to spend this in development? This is hardcore fantasy. Where's the audience for it? You know, you just kind of back off. You're going to go for something softer. I don't know what the sales were for Morrowind, but obviously Oblivion and Skyrim did phenomenally well. You know, that you guys could find financial success with something that was kind of completely contrary to the business logic of the industry as a whole.
Well, and to your point, I feel like we try games that not everybody else will necessarily try. And that doesn't mean we're the only ones that are trying to innovate and do something different, because there's clearly lots of brilliant things happening all over. But you know, the Elder Scrolls, I mean, you've seen some other folks who thought about doing games like that, and then ultimately they went away. We are willing to try and do new IP, and we're also pretty adamant about, like, we don't do sequel stuff. Like, we haven't taken anything and been like, year after year after year, we're gonna do another one of these, or we're gonna bounce it back and forth between studio to studio, just to make sure, like, we feel like making a great game is where it all has to start, and if you do that, everything else will come out of it. And that means, like, you can't just churn stuff out every 9 months, 12 months, and have it be successful. Then you need to go back and kind of rethink, like, what made the last one great, and how do we, you know, push that forward even more. And that's why, you know, there is so long between Elder Scrolls games. That's why, you know, there wasn't a Dishonored 2, a Dishonored 3, and a Dishonored 4, one right after the other. Like, we feel like, you know, teams need time to figure out what they want to do next and why it's going to be different.
Yet there's this fascination amongst all the fans. They want you guys to announce things constantly, when sometimes they're not ready to be announced. And I mean, you have to deal with that all the time on the internet, but it's like people, I mean, I'm sure in some ways it's a tribute to how much people care, but it's like there is this sort of tension about people are like, even if you're developing something it's not announced yet, as you said, you take the time to make sure it's ready to talk about. Yeah, people don't seem to understand that.
I think there's a first of all, to your point, it comes from a love. Like, it's about, you know, they're not asking for games they don't care about or don't want to play. But you know, that people want to be involved. They want to know. But unfortunately, like, we have a slightly different way of going about doing things. That we aren't just beholden to. We're going to add a 1 to the name of the last thing we made and stick it out in 12 months. Like, we have a different cadence of putting things out. We like to take our time. We like to give the developers the ability to say, you don't have to just go back to the last thing. If you want to do a new IP, like we should talk about that. Or so we like to change things up, and so you should never expect that you are going to get information when you want, or that we may or may not be working on the thing that you expect us to be working on. Because again, it comes out of the devs. We're not crowdsourcing our next project to say, okay, everybody vote to decide what the studio's going to be.
What will Todd Howard make next? Tell us. Exactly.
I have a lot more faith in Todd saying, this is what I want to do next. Or going to Roth and Harvey and saying, what do you want to make next? So that we're going to stick with that, and when those guys are ready to talk about the games, that's when we're going to talk about them, and not before.
Right. And Ryder, sometimes things change. As we've seen Bethesda over the years, have been like Prey or other games where it's like you see them, then you don't see them, and I mean they seem to have over the years I always saw Bethesda was it was like sort of Todd's team was great, and there was other stuff that was sort of up in the air about what the quality was going to be, and now it feels like honing in a little bit more on like only quality.
Yeah, it definitely seems like quality is first, and if something's not turning out, it gets canceled or put back in development, and yeah, I think the last batch of games, from Skyrim has been, all about quality and making sure the product is the way it needs to be. And Doom, is a good example. I don't know how long ago you first started talking about it, but
that's been rebooted multiple times. You guys have been pretty public about that, about like changing it.
It was not turning out the way we wanted, and we stopped and started over. And the result of that is what folks got to see here at QuakeCon. But you mentioned games not living up to expectations. Like everybody still asks about Prey 2, but it's one of those things like we're not going to blindly go forward with something that isn't living up to our own expectations. And I think to Reiner's point, we're pretty self-aware of when we make good stuff and when we make stuff that doesn't get there. And in every case, Dishonored, Wolfenstein, everything else, like those games don't have a chance if they're really good quality. It doesn't matter how much money we spent to promote them or whatever. And so we have continued to redouble our efforts to try and make sure like the game is as good as it needs to be.
And even Wolf, I feel like that was a game you delayed a little bit, and I mean there was one point I think where you guys were concerned about how it was going to be, and I mean it felt like that went through its own kind of redevelopment, right?
Within as well, like, but in each of those cases, it was the developer saying like we need more time to get this to where we think it needs.
Does time always solve it though? Because I think sometimes it's like you can have,
It does not.
Right.
And in the cases that it doesn't, like you got to make a tough call to say we're not going to keep going down this road blindly and just assume that it will eventually get better. In the case of Doom, like we could have said, well, we can fix this, and we said, look, like time is not going to fix this. We got to stop and in some respects start over, because that's the only way we're going to get to where we want to be. And it's understanding, it's not always very clear to say, oh, this is a case where it needs to be started over. Oh no, this is a case where game development is hard. I don't know if that info has gotten out. But games are hard to make. And creative things are always, everybody has a different opinion, even within teams. Like there's rarely a game where 100% of the team agreed on every single feature exactly like it was implemented. People have a different, it should be like this or it should be like that. But to Reiner's point, we continue to try and stay focused on quality and make decisions that will ultimately result in the best game.
What's interesting now is, you see this trend, I think, amongst a lot of developers, the early access, things like that, about like bringing the community into the development earlier. EA tried that at E3, where it's sort of like, hey, here's everything we're even kind of thinking about, and we want your feedback on it in real time. I'm curious, do you think is that going to be a growing trend now? Because a lot of game companies like, we're not going to tell you what we're working on, we're going to keep it secret, and then we'll announce it. And now some people are like, we're going to tell you, maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't.
It's a case by case. When I was pressed, and I know Andrew can say this, it's like, come on, give me some information. I need a report on something. And there are times where I think it's a little silly to withhold the existence of a game.
Right.
If a movie studio, when Paramount does really well with a Transformers movie, they're pretty quick saying, yeah, we're gonna do another pile of crap
I think
next year,
they can't keep it quiet. I feel like a movie, it's like as soon as you're going to start shooting it, they're going to know.
But with the community aspect, sometimes it can be really, really good, and sometimes it can be because you can't say everything because you don't know what the game is really going to be. That's a lot of the reason why stuff is withheld, because the game's not done. Unlike, say, something that's more linear, like a film, you start to see that thing come together. One of the terrifying aspects of game development is you all know what it's supposed to be, but you can't figure out if it is that until fairly late in the game. And that's why a lot of information is held back. And if you give too much and then you have to change it with the community, you have complications there. I know that you guys with Fallout, has had some challenges as well with people who just had an idea what that franchise was supposed to be, and you guys were deviating.
It happens all the time. No game has ever gone start to finish exactly like it was intended. You put a feature in, and it could, and to Jeff's point, like if you're talking about it earlier, like you put a feature in that you told everybody the game is going to do this, and then you put it in the game and you play it, and you're like, wow, that sucks. Like that is not only not good, but actually is distracting and keeping the game from being great, and we have to take that out.
Yeah.
And there is a resistance amongst, and it varies from game to game, but I have dealt with a lot of blowback from things that we told people, like the game is going to work like this, and then that got taken out.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you lied. Like, guys, we're not making like square blocks here. Like, this is a constantly evolving process, and people who are playing the game are deciding that's great, we need more of that. That's terrible, take it out. And a lot of game development, believe it or not, is addition by subtraction.
Right.
So
Pete, what about that idea of the community sort of being more open about what you're developing? I mean, there has been that trend in that direction. How are you guys adapting to that or thinking about it?
I think there's a lot of people who would argue we're not.
Right.
Simply by my refusal to tell them what they want to know,
Right.
I am going counter to that trend. Look, again,
Until today.
I think we are doing a variety of things today that are different than the way we might have done them 5 years ago. I think we continue to evolve how we want to talk about games and when, but we still have this pretty strongly held belief that we want to be able to demonstrate the game in a certain way to, as Adam referenced, like not just talk about what it's going to be, but say like, here it is.
Right.
Like, I'm not just talking about this feature, but Skyrim is a perfect example. Like we could have talked a lot about that stuff before showing any of it, but it was the impact was Todd had a demo that wherein he showed how all of those things are going to work, and it was so much more powerful because you saw how dual wielding worked, how having a spell in one hand and a sword in the other, how that felt, as opposed to like, oh yeah, you could like have a sword in his hand and a spell in his hand, like, well, that sounds kind of cool, and then you see somebody do it in the game, you're like, oh, that's way cooler, like that is awesome. So it is in being able to demonstrate and show you, like, here it is, manifested. It's not just an idea on a paper, like, we actually figured it out. We feel like that's an important point to get a game to before you start talking about it, because otherwise it's just theory, it's ideas on the page.
And it's very effective. I think you were there, but Fallout 3, I think, was the first time you guys really kind of put that into action, where it was a very substantive demo of the game,
The demo
where
of all
everyone
the
walked
stuff was-
away going, I think I see where this is going, and that's kind of incredible.
You were one of the first folks outside the company we ever showed it to.
Well, in advance of that. Jeff and I get to see games pretty early on, and that vision changes so much as games go on. But when you see that proof of concept, like you're talking about, like those mechanics there, kind of be the backbone of that experience, and you get that vision where you're like, yes, I want to play that. I know exactly what this is going to end up being like. Yeah, it still looks rough, but you got the
You sense that magic. You see that, with cover stories. I remember last year when I saw like No Man's Sky for the first time, I'm like, wow, there's like something really magical here. And if someone would have pitched that, someone just pitched me, hey, there's this game or do that, you're like, yeah, whatever. But it's like when you see it all come together, there's that magic, and tying those things together can be really, really powerful.
Yep, for sure. And so I think we're gonna continue to think about and hopefully evolve the ways in which we do that. I mean, look, doing this Doom thing here at QuakeCon is something we have never ever done before. We said, look, we want to do something that is just for fans, and we're actually not trying to get publicity out of it, because we're not giving guys like you assets or footage or anything. But the idea was, like, we want to go to the fans and kind of reassure them, like, look, we know what we're doing, we're making something you should be excited about, and it's going to be a while before we talk about it, but in the meantime, like, here's a little glimpse inside the, behind the curtain. That's something we would have never done before on any game, so we are continuing to try and figure out ways to involve the community, but to do it at a time where we can, like we did today, to show it here, as opposed to saying, well, here's what it's going to be like, but we can't actually show you anything.
All right, well, thanks to Adam Sessler, Andrew Reiner, and Pete Hines for joining us here on the bonus round at QuakeCon, right here on GameTrailers.